The gunshot echoed through the valley as Rebecca Wainwright ran, her wedding dress snagging on every branch and rock in her path. Her lungs burned with each desperate breath, the taste of dirt and fear bitter on her tongue. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, not a desperate flight through the wilderness of the Montana Territory in the year 1873. Rebecca glanced over her shoulder, tears streaming down her face as she heard the angry shouts of her would-be husband and his friends in pursuit. Harold Blackwood was not a man accustomed to being refused, especially not at the altar and especially not by a woman he considered his property. When she'd finally found the courage to say no to run, he'd responded with rage and a pistol shot that had narrowly missed her head. Her once beautiful ivory dress, ordered all the way from Chicago, was now torn at the hem and sleeve, stained with dirt, sweat, and blood from where thorns had scratched her skin. The delicate lace veil was long gone, ripped away by low-hanging branches as she fled into the wilderness surrounding the small town of Timber Creek. Rebecca stumbled on the uneven ground, falling hard onto her hands and knees. Pain shot through her palms as they scraped against the rocky soil. She tried to rise, but her legs trembled beneath her, refusing to cooperate. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. "Please, God," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Help me." The thunder of hoofbeats made her heart sink. They'd mounted horses to chase her down. There would be no escape now. Rebecca closed her eyes, preparing for whatever punishment Harold would inflict upon her for this humiliation. But the hoofbeats were coming from a different direction. She opened her eyes to see a lone rider approaching from the west, silhouetted against the setting sun. The man rode hard, his horse's powerful strides eating up the distance between them. As he drew closer, Rebecca could make out a lean frame atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. The rider wore a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes, and his duster billowed behind him like a cape. He reined his horse to a stop just yards away from her and dismounted in one fluid motion. "Madam, you all right?" His voice was deep but gentle, concern evident in his tone. "Please," Rebecca gasped, struggling to her feet. "They're coming, they'll kill me." As if on cue, shouts echoed from the trees behind her. The stranger's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. Without hesitation, he removed his duster and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Name's Clayton Reed," he said, his blue eyes meeting hers. "Looks like you're in a heap of trouble." "Rebecca Wainwright," she managed. "They want to force me to marry, no time for details now," Clayton interrupted, his gaze fixed on the tree line where men's voices grew louder. In one swift movement, he lifted her into his arms and placed her on his horse, then swung up behind her. "Hold tight." Rebecca clutched the saddle horn as Clayton urged his horse forward, away from her pursuers. She could hear Harold's enraged voice bellowing orders to his men. A shot rang out, but they were already galloping away, the powerful horse beneath them responding to his master's commands with impressive speed. Clayton kept them moving at a brisk pace, navigating the wilderness with the confidence of someone who knew this land intimately. Rebecca held on, the stranger's body warm against her back, his arms on either side of her as he handled the reins. Despite the danger, she felt oddly secure. When they had put considerable distance between themselves and her pursuers, Clayton slowed the horse to a more sustainable pace. "Thank you," Rebecca said, her voice still unsteady. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "Don't thank me yet," Clayton replied. "Those men looked determined. Mind telling me why you're running through the wilderness in a wedding dress?" Rebecca swallowed hard. "I was supposed to marry Harold Blackwood today. He owns the largest cattle ranch in the territory and most of Timber Creek. My father died last winter, leaving nothing but debts. Harold offered to pay them all if I married him, but you changed your mind." "I never wanted to marry him in the first place," Rebecca said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "He's cruel. I've seen how he treats his workers, his horses, even his previous wife." Clayton tensed behind her. "Previous wife, she died last year. An accident, they said." But there were whispers. She didn't need to finish the thought. They rode in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the occasional call of a bird. "Where were you headed?" Clayton finally asked. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "I just knew I had to get away. My mother has family in Oregon. I thought perhaps I could find them. Clayton let out a low whistle. Oregon's a long way from here, especially on foot in a wedding dress. Despite everything, Rebecca found herself smiling slightly at the absurdity of her situation. I didn't exactly plan this escape. It was impulsive, brave, Clayton corrected. Foolish, maybe, but brave. The sun was setting in earnest now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Clayton guided his horse toward a small stream. We'll need to stop for the night soon, he said. I know a place not far from here where we should be safe. As darkness fell, Clayton led them to a small cabin nestled against a rocky hillside. It was well hidden among the pines, and Rebecca wouldn't have noticed it if they'd ridden past just a few yards to either side. Is this your home? She asked as he helped her down from the horse. Clayton shook his head. Just a hunting cabin I use sometimes. The owner's an old friend who doesn't mind me staying here when I'm passing through. He unsaddled his horse and led the animal to a small lean-to beside the cabin. After ensuring the horse was comfortable with food and water, Clayton returned to where Rebecca stood uncertainly on the porch. It's not much, he said, unlocking the door, but it's dry and there's a stove. The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a wood stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed against the far wall. Simple, but clean and orderly. Clayton lit a lantern, then set about starting a fire in the stove. Rebecca stood awkwardly in the center of the room, still wrapped in his duster, uncertain what to do with herself. You can sit, Clayton said, nodding toward one of the chairs. Must be exhausted after all that running. Rebecca sank gratefully into the chair, suddenly aware of how every muscle in her body ached. Her wedding dress was filthy and torn, her hair a tangled mess, and she realized she must look a fright. I have some spare clothes in my saddlebag, Clayton said, as if reading her thoughts. Nothing fancy, mind you, but clean and dry. Thank you, Rebecca said softly, for everything. You didn't have to help me. Clayton paused in his task of feeding wood into the stove. Couldn't very well leave a lady in distress, could I? His expression grew more serious. Especially not with men like Blackwood involved. I know his type. Once the fire was crackling in the stove, Clayton retrieved his saddlebags and pulled out a clean shirt and a pair of trousers. These will be too big, he said, but they'll do until we can get you something proper. He handed her the clothes, then turned his back respectfully. I'll just step outside while you change. Left alone, Rebecca struggled with the buttons and laces of her wedding dress. It had been designed to require a maid's assistance, and after several frustrating minutes, she realized she couldn't manage it alone. Mr. Reed, she called hesitantly. I'm afraid I need help with these buttons. Clayton returned, his expression carefully neutral. Of course, madam. He approached her slowly, as one might approach a skittish horse. Rebecca turned her back to him, lifting her tangled hair out of the way. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he worked the long row of tiny buttons down her spine. Thank you, she murmured, holding the loosened bodice to her chest. Clayton cleared his throat. I'll wait outside. He left quickly, closing the door firmly behind him. Rebecca changed as quickly as she could, relieved to be free of the constraining wedding dress. Clayton's shirt hung past her knees, and she had to roll the trousers up several times and cinch them tight with a piece of ribbon she salvaged from her dress. She used the same ribbon to tie back her hair, wishing desperately for a comb and some water to wash her face. When Clayton returned, he carried a bucket of fresh water from the stream. Thought you might want to wash up, he said, placing it on the table alongside a relatively clean cloth. Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes at this simple kindness. Thank you. While she washed her face and hands, Clayton busied himself preparing a simple meal from supplies stored in the cabin: dried beef, beans, and hard biscuits softened in coffee. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Rebecca spoke. May I ask what you do, Mr. Reed? Are you a rancher? Just Clayton, please, he replied. And no, not exactly. I was a cavalry scout during the war. These days, I do a bit of everything: guide hunting parties, scout for the army when they need me, occasionally help the marshal track down fugitives. So you're familiar with this territory? Clayton nodded. Every hill and valley from here to the Wyoming border. Been here since '65, right after the war ended. And before that, a shadow crossed his face. Virginia, but there's nothing left for me there now. Rebecca recognized the pain in his voice and didn't press further. They finished their meal in companionable silence. As they cleaned up, Clayton said, "You take the bed, I'll sleep by the stove." "I couldn't possibly, I insist," he said firmly. "I've slept in far worse places than a cabin floor." Too exhausted to argue, Rebecca accepted his offer. The bed was narrow but clean, with a surprisingly soft quilt. As she settled in, she watched Clayton spread his bedroll near the stove, his movements efficient and practiced. "Do you think they'll find us here?" she asked quietly. Clayton looked up, his face half in shadow. "Not tonight. We covered our tracks well, and few people know about this place." He hesitated. "But Blackwood isn't likely to give up easily. Men like him don't accept losing what they consider theirs." "I was never his," Rebecca said, a flash of anger in her voice. "No," Clayton agreed softly. "You certainly weren't." He added another log to the stove. "Try to get some sleep. We'll figure out our next move in the morning." Rebecca closed her eyes, listening to the gentle crackling of the fire and Clayton's steady breathing. Despite the danger that surely still pursued them, she felt safer than she had in months. Her last thought before drifting off to sleep was that she barely knew this man who had risked his life to save her, yet she trusted him completely. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement. Morning light filtered through the cabin's single window. Clayton stood at the stove, his back to her as he prepared breakfast. "Good morning," Rebecca said, sitting up and smoothing her borrowed clothes. Clayton turned, a small smile touching his lips. "Morning, hope you slept well, better than I expected," she admitted. "What time is it?" "Just past dawn, thought we should get an early start." He poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Afraid it's just more biscuits for breakfast. Supplies here are running low." Rebecca accepted the coffee gratefully. "It's perfect, thank you." As they ate, Clayton outlined his plan. "We need to put more distance between us and Blackwood. I know a place about 2 days' ride from here, a small settlement called Willowbrook. Friend of mine runs the general store there. He might be able to help us figure out how to get you safely to Oregon." "You do that. Take me all the way to Willowbrook." Clayton's blue eyes met hers. "I'm not in the habit of leaving jobs half-finished, Miss Wainwright." "Rebecca, please," she said, "and I'm not sure how I'll ever repay you." "No need," he replied simply. "Now, if you're finished, we should pack up and head out. I'd like to make it to Pine Ridge Creek by nightfall." They worked together to tidy the cabin, leaving it as they had found it. Outside, Clayton's chestnut stallion nickered a greeting. "This is Copper," Clayton said as he saddled the horse. "Best mount I've ever had, strong enough to carry us both for a while, though we'll need to walk some to rest him." Rebecca approached the horse cautiously, extending her hand. Copper sniffed her fingers, then nudged her palm gently. "He likes you," Clayton observed, a note of approval in his voice. Once everything was ready, Clayton helped Rebecca onto the saddle, then mounted behind her as he had the day before. They set off at a steady pace, heading west through the forested hills. As they rode, Rebecca told Clayton more about her situation, how her father had been a respected doctor in Timber Creek, until illness had left him unable to work. How the family's savings had dwindled during his long illness, and how after his death, Harold Blackwood had approached her mother with his proposition. "Mama didn't want me to marry him," Rebecca said. "She knew what kind of man he was. But the debts were substantial and we were facing losing our home. When I agreed to the marriage, Blackwood paid off everything immediately." "Your mother must have been distraught when you ran," Clayton observed. Rebecca shook her head. "She passed away 2 months ago, pneumonia. That's when I realized I couldn't go through with the wedding. With Mama gone, there was nothing keeping me there except my promise, and I just couldn't bear the thought of being his wife." "I'm sorry about your mother," Clayton said quietly. "Thank you," Rebecca replied. After a moment she asked, "What about your family? Do you have anyone waiting for you somewhere?" Clayton was silent for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Lost my parents when I was young. My brother and I were raised by our grandfather on his farm in Virginia. My brother died at Gettysburg. Grandfather passed while I was still fighting. The farm was destroyed in the war, so you came west." "Seemed like the only direction left to go," he said simply. They rode in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. The day grew warm, and occasionally they stopped to rest Copper and stretch their legs. Clayton was always vigilant, scanning their surroundings and listening for any signs of pursuit. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. Clayton frowned up at the sky. "Storm's coming. We might not make it to Pine Ridge Creek before it hits." The first fat raindrops began to fall an hour later. Clayton urged Copper to a faster pace, but soon the rain was coming down in sheets, making it difficult to see more than a few yards ahead. "There's a cave not far from here," Clayton shouted over the storm. "We can shelter there." He guided Copper off the trail and through a dense stand of pines. Rebecca clung to the saddle horn, blinking against the rain that lashed her face. Lightning flashed overhead, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Copper snorted nervously but kept moving under Clayton's steady guidance. Finally, Clayton reined in near a rocky outcropping. "There," he said, pointing to a dark opening in the hillside. He dismounted quickly and helped Rebecca down. Together they led Copper into the cave, which was thankfully large enough to accommodate them all comfortably. Inside, it was dry but dark. Clayton lit a small lantern from his saddlebag, revealing a space about 15 feet deep and 10 feet wide. The floor was sandy and relatively clean. "Lucky we found this place," Rebecca said, wringing water from her hair. She was soaked to the skin, Clayton's borrowed clothes clinging to her slender frame. Clayton busied himself seeing to Copper, removing the saddle and rubbing the horse down with a blanket from his pack. "Been caught in worse," he commented. "At least we're not out in it." Rebecca watched him work, admiring the efficient way he moved and his gentle handling of the horse. There was something reassuring about his calm competence, about the way he seemed prepared for any situation. Once Copper was settled, Clayton turned his attention to Rebecca. "You're shivering," he observed with a frown. Rebecca hadn't even noticed, but now that he mentioned it, she realized she was indeed cold. "I'm fine," she said automatically. Clayton gave her a skeptical look as he rummaged in his saddlebag. He pulled out a dry shirt and handed it to her. "It's my last clean one, but you need it more than I do. I've got a slicker that's damp but warm." "Thank you," Rebecca said, taking the offered shirt. She looked around the cave uncertainly. Understanding her dilemma, Clayton said, "I'll step outside for a minute to check on the weather." "But it's pouring rain, I won't melt," he said with a slight smile, already moving toward the cave entrance. Left alone, Rebecca quickly changed into the dry shirt, grateful for its warmth. It smelled faintly of tobacco and leather, and something else she couldn't quite identify, something distinctly Clayton. She used the relatively dry portions of her borrowed trousers to blot her hair as best she could. When Clayton returned, he was indeed soaked, water streaming from his hat and slicker. "Storm's not letting up anytime soon," he reported, removing his dripping hat. "We'll have to wait it out here." He shrugged out of his slicker and hung it on a protruding rock to dry. His shirt beneath was damp but not soaked through. He glanced at Rebecca, who was sitting with her back against the cave wall, her knees drawn up to her chest. "Still cold?" he asked. She nodded reluctantly. "A little." Clayton hesitated, then said, "We should sit together, share warmth." Rebecca felt her cheeks grow warm despite the chill. Yes, that makes sense." Clayton settled beside her, leaving a respectful few inches between them. After a moment's hesitation, he extended his arm. "May I?" Rebecca nodded, and he put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. His body was solid and warm, and despite her initial embarrassment, she found herself relaxing into his embrace. "Better?" he asked, his voice low. "Much," she admitted. Outside, the storm raged on, rain pelting the ground and thunder rolling across the sky. Inside the cave, a strange peace settled over them. Clayton produced some jerky from his saddlebag, and they shared it as they listened to the storm. "Have you always lived in Montana territory?" Rebecca asked. Clayton shook his head. "Spent time in Colorado first, then Wyoming, moved here about 3 years ago." "What brought you here specifically?" He was quiet for a moment. "Needed a fresh start, I suppose. Montana's still wild enough that a man can reinvent himself if he needs to." There was something in his tone that made Rebecca curious. "Were you running from something? Aren't we all in some way?" he countered. Rebecca considered this. I suppose that's true, I certainly am now. Difference is, you're running toward something better. Some folks are just running away. And which are you doing? She asked softly. Clayton didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. Started out running away, I reckon. These days, I'm not so sure. They fell silent, listening to the rain. After a while, Clayton began telling her stories of his scouting days' adventures in unexplored territories, encounters with native tribes, the beauty of landscapes few white people had ever seen. Rebecca listened, entranced by his descriptions and the low, melodic cadence of his voice. As evening approached, the storm finally began to abate. The thunder grew more distant and the rain lessened to a gentle patter. We'll stay here for the night, Clayton decided. Too wet to travel now, and it'll be dark soon anyway. He set about making a small fire near the cave entrance, where the smoke could escape. The warmth and light were welcome as darkness fell outside. Clayton produced a small pot from his pack and prepared a simple stew with dried meat and some wild onions he'd gathered earlier. As they ate, Rebecca found herself studying Clayton's face in the firelight. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through pretense. A few days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and there was a small scar near his right temple. She wondered about the experiences that had etched the fine lines around his eyes and mouth. Clayton caught her looking and raised an eyebrow questioningly. "I was just thinking," Rebecca said quickly, "that I know very little about you, yet I've trusted you with my life. Do you regret it?" He asked. "Not for a moment," she replied honestly. "I'm just curious, I suppose." Clayton set his empty plate aside. "Not much to tell that's worth hearing. I'm a simple man, Rebecca." "I don't believe that for a second," she said. "No simple man would have done what you did for me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps not." He added another stick to the fire. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," she said without thinking, then blushed at her own eagerness. "I mean, whatever you're willing to share." Clayton leaned back against the cave wall. "I was born in 1835 in a small town in Virginia. Had a normal enough childhood, working on my grandfather's farm with my brother Charles. When the war came, we both enlisted in the Confederate Army, though neither of us had much stake in the cause. Just seemed like what men did." His expression grew distant. "Charles died at Gettysburg. I was wounded at Cold Harbor in '64, took a bullet in the shoulder." He absently touched his left shoulder. "By the time I recovered, the war was nearly over. When it ended, I went home to find our farm burned and my grandfather buried in the churchyard." Rebecca's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry," Clayton shrugged. "It was a long time ago. After that, I drifted west like so many others. Worked as a teamster, a ranch hand, even tried my hand at mining for a spell. Eventually found my calling as a scout. I'm good at finding my way, at reading the land and weather. People, too, most times." "Is that why you helped me? Because you read me and knew I was in trouble?" "Partly," he admitted. "But mostly it was because no woman should be forced into marriage against her will, especially not to a man like Blackwood. You know him. Personally, I mean." Clayton's expression hardened. "We've crossed paths. He hired me as a guide for a hunting expedition 2 years ago. Didn't care for the way he treated his horses or his men, and I've heard stories about what happened to his wife." "What did you hear?" Rebecca asked quietly. "That it wasn't an accident," Clayton said bluntly. "That she fell down those stairs with help." Rebecca shuddered. "That's what I feared. There was a maid who hinted as much, but she was dismissed shortly after and no one would speak of it again. Men like Blackwood have a way of silencing talk they don't like," Clayton observed grimly. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. "What will you do once you reach Oregon?" Clayton finally asked. Rebecca sighed. "I'm not entirely sure. My mother's sister lives in Portland, at least. She did when Mama last heard from her 10 years ago. I'm hoping she'll take me in until I can find work." "What kind of work do you do?" "I was teaching at the school in Timber Creek before." She gestured vaguely. "Before all this, I enjoy working with children." Clayton nodded. "You'd make a good teacher, patient and kind." Rebecca smiled, touched by the simple compliment. "Thank you." As the night deepened, they prepared to sleep. Clayton insisted that Rebecca take the bedroll while he used his saddle as a pillow near the fire. "Clayton," Rebecca said as she settled into the bedroll. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for your kindness. In the firelight, she saw his expression soften. Get some rest, Rebecca. We've got a long ride tomorrow. Rebecca closed her eyes, listening to the gentle patter of rain outside and Clayton's steady breathing nearby. Despite the uncertainty of her future, she felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time since her mother's death, she wasn't alone. The next morning dawned clear and bright. They broke their fast with the last of Clayton's provisions, then prepared to leave their shelter. Outside, the world was washed clean by the storm, dew sparkling on every leaf and blade of grass. Clayton saddled Copper while Rebecca folded the bedroll and packed their few belongings. They worked together smoothly, as if they'd been traveling companions for years rather than days. As Clayton helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist, Rebecca found herself hyper-aware of his touch. There was something brewing between them, something tentative and unnamed but undeniably present. They rode hard that day, making up for the time lost to the storm. Clayton was more vigilant than ever, frequently checking their back trail and choosing paths that would be difficult to follow. By mid-afternoon, they reached Pine Ridge Creek, a swift-flowing stream bordered by tall pines. We're making good time, Clayton said as they stopped to rest Copper. Should reach Willowbrook by tomorrow afternoon if the weather holds. Rebecca slid from the saddle, stretching her legs. The borrowed clothes were now mostly dry but wrinkled and dirty. She felt acutely conscious of her appearance, her tangled hair, her unwashed face, the men's clothes that hung loosely on her frame. Clayton seemed to read her thoughts. There's a quiet spot downstream where you could wash up if you'd like. I'll keep watch. Grateful for the opportunity, Rebecca followed his directions to a secluded pool fed by the creek. The water was cold but refreshing as she washed her face and arms and did her best to comb through her hair with her fingers. She even managed to rinse some of the dirt from Clayton's shirt, though it remained hopelessly wrinkled. When she returned, Clayton had built a small fire and was brewing coffee. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression made her heart skip a beat. Feel better? He asked. Rebecca nodded, suddenly shy under his gaze. Much, thank you. They shared a simple meal of fresh trout that Clayton had caught and cooked while she was gone. As they ate, he told her more about Willowbrook and his friend who owned the general store. Rufus Jenkins is a good man, Clayton said. Came west after the war like me. His wife makes the best apple pie in the territory. They'll help us figure out how to get you safely to Oregon. And what will you do then? Rebecca asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Clayton poked at the fire with a stick. I've got a job waiting with the Army at Fort Ellis. They need scouts for a mapping expedition. I see, Rebecca said, ignoring the inexplicable disappointment that settled in her chest. Of course Clayton had his own life, his own plans. She had no claim on him beyond the debt of gratitude she already owed. They spent the night camped by the creek. The air was cool but not cold, the sky clear and filled with stars. Clayton again insisted that Rebecca take the bedroll while he slept near the fire with his saddle for a pillow. Rebecca lay awake for a long time, listening to the gentle murmur of the creek and watching the play of firelight on Clayton's face as he slept. In just 2 days, he had become important to her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. The thought of parting ways in Willowbrook left her with an ache she hadn't expected. Dawn found them back on the trail, Copper moving at a steady pace through increasingly civilized country. They passed occasional homesteads and small farms, signs that they were nearing more settled areas. Around midday, they stopped in a meadow to rest. While Clayton refilled their canteens at a nearby spring, Rebecca gathered wildflowers that grew in abundance among the grasses. The simple activity reminded her of happier days with her mother, and she found herself smiling as she wove some of the blooms into a rough crown. When Clayton returned, he paused, watching her. You look happy, he observed. Rebecca looked up, the flower crown in her hands. I suppose I am, despite everything. It's nice to feel free, even if it's only temporary. Clayton sat beside her on a fallen log. It doesn't have to be temporary. Blackwood has no legal claim on you. Perhaps not, Rebecca agreed, but he's a powerful man with far-reaching influence. And I have nowhere to go, no money, no family except an aunt who may not even remember me. You'll find your way, Clayton said with quiet confidence. You're stronger than you know." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. For a breathless moment, Rebecca thought he might lean toward her, might close the small distance between them. Instead, Clayton cleared his throat and stood. "We should keep moving if we want to reach Willowbrook by nightfall." The moment broken, Rebecca nodded and rose, leaving the flower crown on the log as they continued their journey. As the afternoon wore on, Clayton grew increasingly alert, frequently checking their back trail with a frown. "Is something wrong?" Rebecca finally asked. "Not sure," he replied. "Just a feeling, might be nothing." But his hand rested more frequently on the revolver at his hip, and he chose their path with even greater care, avoiding open spaces when possible and keeping to the cover of trees and rocky outcroppings. They were passing through a narrow valley when Clayton suddenly reined in, his body tense. "Listen," he said quietly. Rebecca held her breath. At first she heard nothing but the wind in the pines and the occasional bird call. Then she caught the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple horses moving at speed. "Could be anyone," she said hopefully. Clayton's expression was grim. "Could be, but we can't take that chance." He urged Copper off the trail and into a dense stand of trees. "We'll circle around, take the high path into Willowbrook." They rode in tense silence, climbing steadily up a rocky slope that offered a view of the valley below. From this vantage point, they could see a group of riders moving along the trail they had abandoned. 5 men, all armed, with Harold Blackwood in the lead. Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. "They found us." "They found our trail," Clayton corrected, "but they don't have us yet." He guided Copper along a game path that wound through the trees near the ridgeline. It was slower going, but it kept them hidden from the men below. "Willowbrook is just beyond that next ridge," Clayton told her. "Once we're there, you'll be safer." Blackwood doesn't have the same influence there as he does in Timber Creek. They were making good progress when disaster struck. A covey of grouse burst suddenly from the underbrush, startling Copper. The horse reared, and though Clayton quickly brought him under control, the damage was done. One of the men below pointed up at them, shouting to his companions. "Ride," Clayton commanded, spurring Copper forward. The horse responded magnificently, galloping along the narrow path with sure-footed determination. But their pursuers had seen them now and were racing to cut them off where the path descended toward Willowbrook. Clayton pushed Copper to his limits, the powerful animal giving everything he had. They crested the ridge and started down the other side, the small settlement of Willowbrook visible in the valley below. But Blackwood and his men had the advantage of fresher horses and a more direct route. As Clayton and Rebecca reached the valley floor, their pursuers emerged from a stand of trees directly ahead, blocking their path to the town. Clayton reined in sharply, turning Copper to seek another route. But they were surrounded now, Blackwood and his men forming a loose circle around them. "Well, well," Blackwood called, his face flushed with anger and exertion. "If it isn't the runaway bride and her rescuer." Harold Blackwood was a large man with a florid complexion and cold, pale eyes. He sat his horse with the stiff posture of someone who viewed riding as a necessity rather than a pleasure. His expensive suit was dusty from the chase, and sweat stained his collar. "Let us pass, Blackwood," Clayton said, his voice calm but authoritative. Blackwood laughed, an ugly sound. "I don't think so, Reed. You've stolen something that belongs to me and I've come to collect." "I belong to no one," Rebecca said fiercely, finding her voice despite her fear. Blackwood's gaze fixed on her, his expression darkening. "You made a promise, Rebecca. Your father's debts, your mother's care, your comfortable life all paid for by me, and this is how you repay my generosity. By humiliating me in front of the entire town." "Generosity," Rebecca repeated incredulously. "You bought me like cattle and expected me to be grateful." "I never loved you, Harold. I never even liked you." Blackwood's face contorted with rage. "Love has nothing to do with it. We had an arrangement." "An arrangement she's chosen to break," Clayton interjected. "Let it go, Blackwood. There are plenty of women who'd be happy to marry a man of your position." "But I want this one," Blackwood said coldly, "and I always get what I want." He nodded to his men. "Take her, kill him. Everything happened at once." Clayton's revolver appeared in his hand as if by magic, and he fired twice in rapid succession. One of Blackwood's men cried out, clutching his shoulder as he toppled from his horse. Another's hat flew from his head, and he ducked instinctively. In the confusion, Clayton spurred Copper forward, aiming for a gap in the circle of men. But Blackwood was ready. He drew his own pistol and fired. Clayton jerked in the saddle, and Rebecca felt something warm and wet splash against her back. "Clayton," she cried, twisting to look at him. "Keep going," he gritted through clenched teeth, his face pale but determined. He fired again, and another of Blackwood's men fell. They broke through the circle, Copper running flat out toward Willowbrook. Behind them, Blackwood shouted orders to his remaining men. More shots rang out, but they were moving targets now, and the bullets went wide. Clayton's arm around Rebecca's waist was weakening. "Almost there," she encouraged him, taking the reins to guide Copper when Clayton's grip faltered. The first buildings of Willowbrook loomed ahead: a smithy, a small church, scattered houses. People emerged at the sound of gunfire, staring in shock at the spectacle of a wounded man and a woman in men's clothing riding hell for leather into town with armed pursuers on their heels. "Help!" Rebecca shouted as they reached the main street. "Please help us." A large man with a blacksmith's apron stepped into the street, a hammer in his massive hand. Two more men joined him, one holding a shotgun. Blackwood and his remaining men slowed, then stopped, clearly reassessing the situation. The odds had shifted now that the fugitives had witnesses and potential allies. "What's going on here?" the blacksmith demanded, his deep voice carrying easily. Clayton straightened in the saddle with visible effort. "Rufus," he called, "got myself in a bit of trouble." The blacksmith Rufus stepped closer, his expression shifting from wariness to concern as he recognized Clayton. "Reed, that you? Good Lord, man, you're bleeding." "Later," Clayton said, his voice weaker now. "This lady needs protection. These men mean her harm." Rufus took in the situation with a quick glance. Rebecca in her borrowed clothes, Clayton wounded, the well-dressed man and his rough companions bristling with weapons. "This true, madam?" he asked Rebecca. "Yes," she replied fervently. "That man Harold Blackwood tried to force me to marry him. Clayton saved me, and now they've shot him." Rufus's expression hardened. He turned to Blackwood. "That how it is?" Blackwood drew himself up. "This is none of your concern. The woman is my fiancée. She's confused, unwell. This man took advantage of her vulnerable state." "Liar," Rebecca spat. "I was never your fiancée willingly. You blackmailed me with my father's debts." Murmurs ran through the growing crowd of townspeople. A woman pushed forward, tall and capable-looking, with graying hair and kind eyes. "Martha," Clayton acknowledged her weakly. "Let's get you down from there," she said decisively. "You need a doctor." She looked at Rebecca. "You too, dear, you're safe now." As if her words had broken the last of his reserves, Clayton slumped forward. Rebecca cried out in alarm as his weight fell against her. Several men rushed forward to help, easing Clayton carefully from the saddle. Rebecca dismounted quickly, moving to Clayton's side. His face was ashen, his shirt soaked with blood. "Please," she begged the woman called Martha. "Please help him." "We will," Martha assured her. She looked to the men supporting Clayton. "Take him to Doc Wilson's. Hurry now." As they carried Clayton away, Rebecca made to follow, but Blackwood's voice stopped her. "This isn't over, Rebecca," he called. "You made a promise, and I mean to see it kept." Rebecca turned to face him, anger overcoming fear. "The promise was extracted under duress and is therefore null and void," she said clearly. "I will never marry you, Harold Blackwood. Never." Rufus and several other men moved to stand beside her, a clear message to Blackwood and his companions. "You heard the lady," Rufus said. "I suggest you ride out now while you still can." Blackwood's face contorted with rage, but he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. With a final venomous glare at Rebecca, he wheeled his horse around. "This isn't the end," he warned before spurring away, his remaining men following. Martha put a gentle arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "Come, dear, let's get you to the doctor's as well. You look about ready to collapse." Rebecca allowed herself to be led away, her thoughts with Clayton and the bullet he'd taken to protect her. The doctor's house was a neat white building near the center of town. Inside, Clayton had already been laid on a table in what served as the examination room. The doctor, a bespectacled man with steady hands, was cutting away Clayton's bloodied shirt. "How bad is it?" Rebecca asked, her voice shaking. The doctor glanced up. "Bullet went through his side, missed anything vital from the looks of it, but he's lost a good deal of blood. He'll live." Rebecca pressed. "If infection doesn't set in, yes." The doctor returned his attention to Clayton, who was conscious but clearly in pain. "Going to hurt like the devil while it heals, though." Relief flooded through Rebecca. She moved to Clayton's side, taking his hand in hers. His fingers tightened weakly around hers. "You're safe?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she assured him. "Thanks to you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Good." His eyes closed, whether from exhaustion or the laudanum the doctor had administered, Rebecca wasn't sure. Martha gently pulled Rebecca away. "Let the doctor work, dear. Clayton's in good hands. Now let's see about getting you cleaned up and into some proper clothes." Rebecca reluctantly allowed herself to be led from the room. In a daze, she followed Martha to a comfortable home a short distance away, where she was given a bath, clean clothes that had belonged to Martha's daughter, and a hot meal. "You've had quite an ordeal," Martha observed as Rebecca ate. "Rufus told me some of it, but I'd like to hear your side if you're willing." Rebecca told her everything: her father's death, her mother's illness, Blackwood's proposition, her desperate flight from the altar, and Clayton's timely rescue. Martha listened without interruption, her kind face registering shock, sympathy, and anger at appropriate moments. When Rebecca finished, Martha reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "You're welcome to stay with us as long as you need," she said. "Any friend of Clayton's is a friend of ours." "Thank you," Rebecca said, tears threatening. "I don't know what I would have done if we hadn't made it here." "Well, you did make it," Martha said firmly. "And that Blackwood fellow won't dare show his face around here again, not with Rufus and the other men on alert." Later that evening, after Rebecca had rested, they returned to the doctor's house to check on Clayton. He was sleeping now, his torso heavily bandaged, his face still pale but more peaceful. "I've moved him to the spare room," the doctor told them. "He'll need to stay here for at least a week while that wound starts to heal." "Can I sit with him?" Rebecca asked. The doctor nodded. "Of course. Just try not to wake him. Rest is the best medicine now." Rebecca settled into a chair beside Clayton's bed. In sleep, his face looked younger, the lines of worry and vigilance smoothed away. She studied his features, the strong jaw now covered in several days' worth of beard, the straight nose, the long lashes that rested against his cheeks. Martha brought her dinner on a tray and a quilt for the night. "I thought you might want to stay," she said with an understanding smile. "I'll bring you breakfast in the morning." Left alone with the sleeping Clayton, Rebecca whispered, "Thank you for saving my life. Please get better so I can thank you properly." She dozed fitfully in the chair, waking whenever Clayton stirred or made a sound. Sometime in the small hours of the morning, he opened his eyes, finding her immediately. "You're still here," he murmured. Rebecca leaned forward, taking his hand. "Of course I am. You should be resting in a proper bed." "I'm fine," she assured him. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," he replied with a hint of his dry humor. "But I've had worse." Rebecca felt tears well up. "You could have been killed because of me." Clayton's fingers tightened around hers. "Not because of you, because of Blackwood, and it was my choice to help you." "I'd make the same choice again." "Why?" she asked softly. "Why risk so much for a stranger?" Clayton was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes studying her face. "You weren't a stranger for long," he finally said. "Some people, you just know them somehow, like you've been waiting to meet them." Rebecca's heart quickened at his words. "I know what you mean," she whispered. They looked at each other in the dim light of the single lamp, something unspoken passing between them. Then Clayton's eyes grew heavy again, the laudanum pulling him back toward sleep. "Rest now," Rebecca told him. "I'll be here when you wake." The next few days fell into a pattern. Rebecca spent most of her time at Clayton's bedside, reading to him from books Martha brought, talking about their lives, or simply sitting in companionable silence. When she wasn't with Clayton, she helped Martha with household tasks, grateful for a way to repay some of the woman's kindness. Rufus and Martha Jenkins had taken her in without question, treating her like family. Rebecca learned that they had known Clayton for nearly 2 years, since he'd guided a group of surveyors to the area. They spoke of him with genuine affection and respect. "He's a good man," Rufus told Rebecca one evening as they sat on the porch while Martha prepared dinner. "One of the best I know, doesn't talk much about his past, but his actions speak for him." "He saved my life," Rebecca said simply. Rufus nodded. "That's Clayton for you. Never could abide seeing someone mistreated, especially a woman or child." He paused, studying her. "He cares for you, you know. More than just as someone he helped." Rebecca felt warmth flood her cheeks. "We've only known each other a few days." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Rufus said with a knowing smile. "Martha and I got engaged after knowing each other just 2 weeks, been happily married 30 years now." The thought both thrilled and frightened Rebecca. She'd been so focused on escaping Blackwood and surviving that she hadn't allowed herself to consider what might come next, or what she truly felt for Clayton beyond gratitude. Clayton's recovery progressed steadily. By the 5th day, he was sitting up in bed, and by the 7th, the doctor allowed him to move to a chair by the window. His color improved and his strength began to return, though he tired easily throughout his convalescence. There had been no sign of Blackwood, but Rebecca remained wary. She never ventured far from the Jenkins home or the doctor's house, and Rufus made sure she was never alone when outside. 10 days after their arrival in Willowbrook, Clayton was deemed well enough to be moved to the Jenkins home, where Martha had prepared a room for him. Rebecca helped him make the short journey, his arm around her shoulders as he walked slowly down the street. "Fresh air feels good," Clayton commented, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Don't get too ambitious," Rebecca cautioned. "The doctor said you need at least another week of rest before you even think about getting back on a horse." Clayton glanced down at her, amusement in his eyes. "Yes, madam." At the Jenkins home, they settled into a new routine. Rebecca continued to help Martha with household tasks during the day, while Clayton rested or sat on the porch, gradually regaining his strength. In the evenings, they often played cards or talked, getting to know each other better with each passing day. 2 weeks after their arrival, Clayton was well enough to take short walks around town. Rebecca accompanied him, her hand tucked in the crook of his arm, ostensibly to steady him, though they both knew he no longer needed the support. On one such walk, they stopped at the small church at the edge of town. It was a simple white building with a modest steeple, surrounded by pine trees. The door was open, and they stepped inside, welcoming the cool dimness after the afternoon sun. "It's lovely," Rebecca said, looking at the plain wooden pews and the altar with its single vase of wildflowers. Clayton nodded, his eyes moving around the space. "Simple, honest." He looked down at her. "Like you." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "I'm not sure about that. I agreed to marry a man I didn't love for financial security. That's hardly honest." "You were trying to honor your father's memory and take care of your mother," Clayton corrected. "And when it came down to it, you couldn't go through with it. That took courage and honesty." They stood in silence for a moment, the church quiet around them except for the occasional creak of the wooden structure settling in the afternoon heat. "What will you do now?" Clayton finally asked. "Still planning to go to Oregon?" Rebecca sighed. "I don't know. I haven't heard back from my letter to my aunt yet, and she hesitated. "I've come to care for the people here, for Willowbrook." "For anyone in particular?" Clayton asked, his voice carefully neutral. Rebecca gathered her courage and looked up at him. "Yes, for someone in particular." Clayton's eyes softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished, and touched her cheek gently. "I've been thinking," he said, about not taking that scouting job at Fort Ellis." Rebecca's heart quickened. "Oh, and what would you do instead?" "Rufus mentioned that Willowbrook needs a sheriff," Clayton said. "Town's growing, starting to attract the wrong sort of attention. They've asked me to consider it." "And have you considered it?" Clayton nodded. "It would mean staying in one place, putting down roots." His eyes held hers. "Having a home." "That sounds nice," Rebecca said softly. "It does," Clayton agreed. "Especially if I had someone to share it with." Rebecca's breath caught. "Clayton," he took her hands in his. "I know it's fast. We've only known each other a few weeks. But I've never felt this way about anyone, Rebecca. When I saw you running in that torn wedding dress, something inside me just knew what?" she whispered. "That you were the one I'd been looking for without even knowing I was searching," he said simply. I love you, Rebecca. And if you'll have me, I'd like to court you properly. No rushing, no pressure. Just a chance to see if what I feel, what I hope we both feel, is real. Rebecca felt tears of joy well in her eyes. It's real, she assured him. I've felt it too, and yes, I'd like that very much. Clayton's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, reverent kiss. When they parted, Rebecca felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, as if the world had tilted slightly on its axis, and everything was now in its proper place. We should head back, Clayton said after a moment, though he made no move to leave. Martha will be wondering where we've gotten to. Rebecca nodded, but neither of them moved. They stood in the quiet church, hands linked, savoring the moment and the promise it held. Their courtship progressed naturally over the following weeks. Clayton accepted the position as sheriff of Willowbrook, and Rebecca found work teaching at the small school. They took meals together with the Jenkins, went for walks in the evenings, and gradually learned the rhythms of each other's lives. News came from Rebecca's aunt in Oregon, a warm letter welcoming her to visit or stay, should she wish. Rebecca wrote back, explaining that she had found a home in Willowbrook and hoped her aunt might visit instead. The threat of Blackwood lingered at the edges of their happiness. They had heard nothing from him since that day, but Clayton remained vigilant, and Rebecca never quite shook the feeling that Blackwood was not a man to admit defeat easily. As summer turned to fall, Clayton and Rebecca's relationship deepened. They discovered shared interests in books and music, compatible temperaments, and a mutual delight in simple pleasures. Clayton proved to be a thoughtful, attentive suitor, bringing Rebecca wildflowers from his rides around the county, listening with genuine interest to her stories about her students, and sharing with her more of his own past and dreams for the future. On a crisp October evening, they sat on the Jenkins' porch swing, a quilt wrapped around their shoulders against the chill. The leaves had turned to brilliant reds and golds, and the air smelled of wood smoke and pine. "I've been thinking," Clayton said, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, leaning into his warmth. He chuckled, then grew serious. "I've been sheriff here for nearly 3 months now, got my own place fixed up on the edge of town." "It's coming along nicely," Rebecca agreed. She had helped him select curtains for the windows and plants for the small garden. "It still needs something, though," Clayton continued, "or someone." Rebecca's heart quickened. "Oh," Clayton shifted to look at her directly. "Rebecca, I love you. These past months have been the happiest of my life. I know we agreed to take things slow, and if you need more time, I understand. But I'm certain of what I feel. I want to spend my life with you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Opening it, he revealed a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My grandfather kept it for me. It's not fancy, it's perfect," Rebecca interrupted, tears blurring her vision. Clayton took her hand. "Rebecca Wainwright, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Clayton Reed, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Clayton drew her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke volumes about his feelings. When they told Martha and Rufus their news, the older couple was delighted but hardly surprised. "About time," Rufus said with a grin. "Been expecting this announcement for weeks." Martha hugged Rebecca warmly. "I'm so happy for you both. When's the wedding to be?" Clayton and Rebecca exchanged a look. "We were thinking next month," Clayton said. "Nothing fancy, just family and friends." "November is a lovely time for a wedding," Martha approved, "and we'll host the reception right here." The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy but joyful. Rebecca, with Martha's help, sewed a simple but elegant wedding dress of ivory satin. The town embraced the coming nuptials, with everyone from the blacksmith to the baker offering contributions to the celebration. 3 days before the wedding, a letter arrived for Rebecca. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and there was no return address. With a sense of foreboding, she opened it. The message inside was brief but chilling. "A debt unpaid is still a debt. Some promises cannot be broken without consequences." Rebecca's hands trembled as she showed the letter to Clayton that evening. His expression darkened as he read it. "Blackwood," he said grimly. "I'd hoped he'd given up." "What should we do?" Rebecca asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. Clayton's jaw set in a determined line. "We go ahead with the wedding, but I'll have Rufus and some of the other men keep watch. Blackwood won't spoil this for us." Despite Clayton's reassurances, Rebecca slept poorly that night, haunted by memories of Blackwood's cold eyes and the ruthlessness she had witnessed in him. The day before the wedding, Clayton was called away to deal with a disturbance at the saloon on the edge of town. Rebecca remained at the Jenkins home, helping Martha with last-minute preparations for the reception. As evening fell and Clayton had not yet returned, Rebecca grew increasingly uneasy. "He should have been back by now," she said, peering out the window at the darkening street. "Probably just sorting out the details," Rufus reassured her. "Sheriff work isn't always predictable." But when another hour passed with no sign of Clayton, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "I'm going to look for him," she decided. Rufus frowned. "I'll go, you stay here with Martha where it's safe." "We'll both go," Rebecca countered. "Martha can tell him where we've gone if he returns while we're out." Reluctantly, Rufus agreed. They set out toward the saloon, the streets quiet and mostly deserted as evening had given way to night. The saloon itself seemed peaceful enough from the outside, with only the usual sounds of piano music and conversation drifting through its doors. Inside, they found a typical evening crowd: miners, ranch hands, and a few townspeople enjoying drinks and cards. But no sign of Clayton. "Was the sheriff here earlier?" Rufus asked the bartender. The man nodded. "Sure was. Came in about that fight between Wilson and the new fellow. Sorted it out quick enough and left." "How long ago?" Rebecca asked, her worry deepening. The bartender shrugged. 3, maybe 4 hours. Said he was heading back to the office to finish some paperwork. They checked the sheriff's office next, finding it empty and locked. Clayton's desk was tidy, with no indication that he had been there recently. A cold knot formed in Rebecca's stomach. "Something's happened to him," she said. "I know it." Rufus looked troubled now, too. "Let's check his house. Maybe he went home and lost track of time." But Clayton's small house was dark and empty as well. As they stood on his porch, undecided what to do next, a young boy came running up the street. "Miss Wainwright," he called. "Miss Wainwright," Rebecca recognized him as one of her students. "Jimmy, what is it?" The boy skidded to a stop, breathing hard. "Man asked me to give you this," he panted, holding out a folded piece of paper. "Gave me a whole $1 to bring it straight to you." Rebecca took the paper with trembling fingers. "What man, Jimmy? What did he look like?" "Big fellow, fancy clothes, had a scar here," Jimmy pointed to his chin. "Never seen him before." Rebecca and Rufus exchanged alarmed glances. She unfolded the note quickly, reading the message written in an elegant hand. "If you want to see your cowboy alive again, come to the old Miller place at midnight. Come alone or he dies. A debt must be paid." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "It's Blackwood. He has Clayton." Rufus took the note from her shaking hands and read it himself. "The old Miller place is about 3 miles outside town, abandoned farm." His expression was grim. "This is a trap, Rebecca. You can't go alone." "I have to," Rebecca said, her fear for Clayton overriding everything else. "He'll kill him if I don't." "And he'll likely kill you both if you do," Rufus countered. "We need to gather the men, form a plan." Rebecca shook her head. "There's no time. It's already past 11. She made a quick decision. "I'll go, but you gather as many men as you can and follow. Just stay far enough back that Blackwood doesn't see you coming." Rufus looked unhappy with the plan, but nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, and stall as long as you can to give us time to get there." Rebecca hurried back to the Jenkins house to change into riding clothes and borrow a horse. Martha tried to dissuade her, but Rebecca was resolute. "I have to go," she said as she mounted the horse. "Clayton would do the same for me." The night was clear but moonless as Rebecca rode toward the Miller farm, her heart pounding with fear and determination. The abandoned property came into view just before midnight, a dilapidated farmhouse and barn, barely visible in the darkness. As she approached, a lantern flared to life on the porch of the farmhouse. In its light, she could make out Harold Blackwood's substantial figure. "Right on time," he called as she reined in her horse. I'm impressed. Rebecca dismounted, her legs unsteady beneath her. Where is Clayton? Blackwood smiled coldly. Safe for now. Come inside, Rebecca. Let's discuss our situation like civilized people. Everything in Rebecca screamed that this was a trap, but she had no choice if she wanted to save Clayton. She followed Blackwood into the farmhouse, the floorboards creaking beneath their feet. The interior was dusty and mostly empty, with a few pieces of broken furniture scattered about. A lantern sat on a rickety table, casting long shadows across the room, and tied to a chair in the center of the room, bloodied but conscious, was Clayton. Clayton. Rebecca rushed toward him, but Blackwood caught her arm in a painful grip. Not so fast, he said. We have business to conclude first. Clayton raised his head, his eyes finding Rebecca's. I told you not to come, he said, his voice hoarse. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap, Blackwood said pleasantly. But what choice did she have? Love makes fools of us all, doesn't it? Let him go, Rebecca demanded, wrenching her arm free of Blackwood's grasp. Your quarrel is with me, Blackwood laughed. My quarrel is with both of you. He stole what was rightfully mine and you broke your promise. He pulled a pistol from his coat pocket. But I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to offer you a choice, Rebecca. What choice? She asked warily. Simple. Come back to Timber Creek with me now, marry me as you promised, and I'll let your cowboy live. Refuse, and I'll kill him right here in front of you. Rebecca felt sick. And if I agree? How do I know you'll keep your word? You don't, Clayton said from his chair. He won't. Don't do it, Rebecca. Blackwood struck Clayton across the face with the pistol. Shut up. This is between me and my fiancé. I am not your fiancé, Rebecca said, her voice steadier than she felt. She was playing for time now, praying that Rufus and the others would arrive soon. And I never truly agreed to marry you. You coerced me, used my father's debts and my mother's illness against me. Call it what you will, Blackwood shrugged. A deal is a deal. You broke yours and now there's a price to pay. He leveled the pistol at Clayton's head. Choose Rebecca now. Rebecca's mind raced. She needed more time. If I go with you, she said slowly, I want to say goodbye to him first. Blackwood considered this, then nodded. Very well. You have 2 minutes, then we leave or he dies. Rebecca moved to Clayton's side, kneeling beside his chair. His face was bruised, a cut above his eye still seeping blood. She touched his cheek gently. I'm sorry, she whispered. This is all my fault. Clayton shook his head slightly. No. Listen to me, Rebecca. Whatever happens, know that I love you. These past months have been worth everything. Tears filled Rebecca's eyes. I love you too. She leaned closer, as if to kiss him, and whispered, Rufus is coming. I just need to stall a little longer. Understanding flashed in Clayton's eyes. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Time's up, Blackwood announced. Let's go, Rebecca. Rebecca rose slowly, positioning herself between Blackwood and Clayton. I need your word that you won't harm him once we leave. Blackwood smiled thinly. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. If you want me to come willingly, that's my condition, Rebecca insisted. Swear it. Fine. I swear I won't harm him further, Blackwood said impatiently. Now come along. I have a minister waiting in Timber Creek. A minister at this hour. Rebecca asked skeptically, still stalling. Blackwood's patience was visibly wearing thin. Enough questions. We're leaving now. He grabbed her arm again, pulling her toward the door. At that moment, the sound of approaching horses came from outside. Blackwood stiffened, moving to the window to peer out. You brought others, he accused, his face contorting with rage. You'll regret that. He raised his pistol, aiming at Clayton once more. Without thinking, Rebecca threw herself at Blackwood, knocking his arm upward. The pistol discharged, the bullet hitting the ceiling as they struggled. Blackwood was much stronger, and he threw Rebecca to the floor with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. Before he could take aim again, the door burst open. Rufus stood there, shotgun in hand, with 3 other men behind him. Drop it, Blackwood, Rufus commanded, but Blackwood was beyond reason. With a roar of fury, he swung his pistol toward the newcomers. Rufus fired first, the shotgun blast catching Blackwood in the chest. He staggered backward, a look of shock on his face, then collapsed to the floor. The next minutes were a blur. Someone untied Clayton while Rufus checked on Blackwood, confirming what was already obvious: the man was dead. Rebecca clung to Clayton, both of them shaking with relief and residual fear. "Are you all right?" she asked, examining his injuries. "What did he do to you?" "Nothing that won't heal," Clayton assured her, though he winced as he stood. "Ambushed me outside the saloon, him and two others, knocked me out and brought me here." "The others?" Rufus asked sharply. "Ran off when they heard you coming," Clayton said. "Hired guns, not particularly loyal." They made their way back to Willowbrook slowly, Clayton riding double with Rebecca while Rufus and the others brought Blackwood's body. By the time they reached town, it was nearly dawn, and news of the night's events spread quickly. The doctor attended to Clayton's injuries, which proved to be mostly superficial: a concussion, bruised ribs, and various cuts and bruises. By afternoon, he was resting comfortably in his own home, with Rebecca steadfastly at his side. "Some wedding eve this turned out to be," Clayton commented wryly as Rebecca changed the bandage on his forehead. "At least Blackwood can't threaten us anymore," Rebecca said, though she took no joy in the man's death. Clayton caught her hand, his expression growing serious. "Are you sure you still want to go through with the wedding tomorrow? We could postpone, give ourselves time to recover from all this." Rebecca shook her head firmly. "I've never been more certain of anything, unless you're having doubts." "Not a single one," Clayton assured her, pulling her down for a gentle kiss. "Tomorrow can't come soon enough for me." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the November air crisp but not cold. Despite the events of the previous night, or perhaps because of them, there was a special poignancy to the occasion. Life was precious and uncertain, and Clayton and Rebecca were acutely aware of how close they had come to losing each other. The small church was filled with the people of Willowbrook, who had embraced Rebecca as one of their own and who respected Clayton as both their sheriff and a man of integrity. Martha had decorated the simple space with fall flowers and ribbon, transforming it into something truly special. Rebecca dressed in her ivory satin gown, Martha helping her with the buttons and arranging her hair. She wore no veil, only a crown of late-blooming wildflowers that Clayton had somehow managed to find for her despite his injuries. "You look beautiful," Martha said, tears in her eyes. "Absolutely radiant." Rebecca studied her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was indeed radiant, her eyes bright with happiness, her cheeks flushed with anticipation. How different from the terrified bride she had been just a few months ago, fleeing in a torn and stained wedding dress. Rufus escorted her to the church, standing in for the father she had lost. As they approached the building, Rebecca's heart quickened at the thought of Clayton waiting inside for her. The small congregation rose as she entered. And there at the altar stood Clayton, his injuries still visible but his smile luminous as he watched her walk toward him. He wore a new black suit, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, his blue eyes never leaving her face as she approached. When she reached him and Rufus placed her hand in his, Clayton whispered, "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for all their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Clayton's kiss was tender but filled with promise. The celebration afterward at the Jenkins home was joyous. The entire town seemed determined to make this a day to remember, with abundant food, music, and dancing despite Clayton's injuries. As evening fell, they slipped away to Clayton's house, now their home, leaving the celebration to continue without them. Inside, Clayton had prepared a surprise. The main room was transformed with candles and flowers, a bottle of champagne chilling on the table. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," he said softly, drawing her into his arms. Rebecca smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting. "I like the sound of that." Clayton traced her cheek with gentle fingers. "I've been thinking about that day we met you running through the woods in your torn wedding dress, me lifting you onto copper. Strangest beginning to a love story I could imagine. But perfect in its way," Rebecca said. "I was running from a forced marriage into the arms of a true love I hadn't yet met. Poetic," Clayton smiled. "And true." He kissed her forehead. "I promise you, Rebecca, I will spend every day of our life together making sure you never regret choosing this path." "I already know I won't," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him properly. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be. 2 years later, Rebecca stood on the porch of their expanded home at the edge of Willowbrook, watching Clayton approach on horseback. Their daughter, Catherine, now 6 months old, cooed in her arms, reaching out toward her father as he drew near. Willowbrook had grown in the past 2 years, nearly doubling in size as the railroad had finally reached them. Clayton remained sheriff, respected and well-liked by all. Rebecca had returned to teaching after Catherine's birth, bringing her daughter with her to the now larger schoolhouse, where she taught the children of the growing community. They had weathered challenges: a harsh winter, a bout of influenza that had swept through the town, the occasional trouble that came with growth and change. But through it all, their love had only deepened, their partnership strengthening with each obstacle overcome. As Clayton dismounted and bounded up the steps to embrace his family, Rebecca was struck once again by how fortunate she was. From the terror of that day in her torn wedding dress to the joy of this simple moment with her husband and child, what an extraordinary journey it had been. "My girls," Clayton said, kissing Catherine's downy head and then Rebecca's lips. "The two most beautiful sights in Montana territory. How was your day?" Rebecca asked, leaning into his embrace. "Good, quiet, just how I like it." He took Catherine from her arms, lifting the baby high above his head to her delighted giggles. "And how's my little deputy today? She's been practicing her rolling," Rebecca reported. "I think she'll be crawling before we know it." Clayton groaned in mock dismay. "Then we'll really be in trouble. Nothing in this house will be safe." They moved inside to the warmth of their home and the dinner Rebecca had prepared. As they sat together at the table, Catherine settled in her cradle nearby. Rebecca was overcome with a sense of profound gratitude. "What is it?" Clayton asked, noticing her expression. Rebecca smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I was just thinking. If someone had told me 3 years ago, as I was running through the woods in my torn wedding dress, that I would end up here happily married to a wonderful man, with a beautiful daughter, and a place where I truly belong, I would never have believed them." Clayton's eyes softened as he squeezed her hand. "Sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the best destinations, and the most unexpected rescuers turn out to be the greatest loves," Rebecca added. Outside, the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Inside, in the warm glow of lantern light, a family built on courage, sacrifice, and love continued writing their story one day, one moment, one heartbeat at a time. And if anyone in Willowbrook ever needed reminding of how powerful love could be, they had only to look to their sheriff and his schoolteacher wife, who had found each other against all odds on a desperate day when her wedding dress was torn and stained, and a cowboy had lifted her onto his horse and eventually married her still.